Good morning, everyone. As we gather in this virtual space, we recognize for this first instance that we are connected with one another through the winds that blow air into our lungs and through the waters that move deep into the earth and up into the sky. We acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples, many of whom have been forced to leave for other lands. We now share the names of the peoples who were the first to live, celebrate, lament, and sing upon the land where we now sit. The University of North Carolina at Charlotte is located on the traditional territories of the Catawba, Waxhaw, Shera, and Suga peoples, and as many of us are settlers, migrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this land, we are here because this land is colonized. May we also remember that Indigenous peoples are not a people of the past, but are here with us now. And if there are Indigenous people in this call, I thank you for being with us today. Finally, we ask the entire audience to accept this invitation to honor, protect, and sustain this land through shared knowledge and support for the many Indigenous communities who continue to thrive here in our diverse locations today. I put some additional information about the land acknowledgement in the chat and encourage each of you to learn about the Indigenous people of your own unique geographic location. All right, and then one other quick bit of business for the UNCC students who are graduating from the Department of Art and Art History. The Goodyear Arts, which hopefully you all know and love, is having a, what am I calling it? Sorry, this is where I didn't finish writing my notes, but they're offering up a studio space to somebody who's graduated in fall 2020 or spring 2021. There's a lot of great information about it and an application form at the link that I just put into the chat. So if you haven't checked this out and you are graduating this semester or graduated last semester, project space for students. Thank you. Yes, Andrew. Yes. Please do check that out. Okay. And now for today's speaker, I'm really excited. I'm super pleased to welcome Dr. Eric Patterson, Associate Director of the Digital Production Arts Program and Associate Professor in the Visual Computing Division of Clemson University's School of Computing. Eric's interests include research in computer graphics, vision, machine learning, and multimedia signal processing, along with animation, film, game, and visual effects production. He was formerly professor in computer science department, as well as the digital arts coordinator at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where he helped to create the interdisciplinary digital arts degree program, graduate programs in computer science and data science, the film studies department, and the Face Aging Lab and I3S Research Institute. Along with his academic work, Eric has also kept active in the industry with consulting with DigiEffects and other companies, a faculty fellowship at Sony Pictures Imageworks, a research and development residency with the technical art team at Red Storm Ubisoft, and professional film and photography projects. So give it up with me now for Eric Patterson. Thanks for coming. Yay.
Thank you, Heather, for both the beautiful opening and the introduction. So I'll get started. Please let me know, maybe yell even if for some reason the connection breaks or something isn't coming through, okay? Because on my laptop, all I'll see is my slides. So
sure, I'll shout out or something.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning, everybody. Pretty much all those things as mentioned, that's me a little bit. I kind of grew up interested in a lot of things, both in math, science, technology, engineering, and also in the arts. I had the privilege of parents who sort of encouraged both of those things. And I grew up learning to draw and paint and sculpt and play the piano, but also taking pieces of electronics apart and learning how to program and different things like that. So I went into computing with the idea of doing fun stuff with it. And that's what I've tried to do over my career. I've largely been in academics, but I prefer academics that keep pulse with the real world. So you'll see some of that themes in some of my work. So my rough idea for my talk today, I wanted to give a theme of trends in digital production arts. So when I talk about production, that's typically going to involve film, visual effects, game development, but all of that's broadening these days with virtual reality projects and augmented reality projects and mobile development, and everything is sort of coming together and also broadening at the same time, which is interesting. So I'm going to kind of go through my talk with the rough idea of spending about 10 minutes or so on some of these trends, show you a little bit of my work for a few minutes, and then talk about our graduate program at Clemson University. So these are some of the trends that I highlighted. One of the things that I try to do as I work is to also keep track of what things are going on. Even if they're not projects that I'm doing, I kind of keep tabs with a large network of people in industry, and also going to conferences like SIGGRAPH and staying involved. I'm a member of the Visual Effects Society, and different things like this kind of help me take a big picture look at what's going on. So these are some of the 5 trends that I've picked out to sort of cover really quickly. And these are trends that are kind of making their presence in different ways in visual effects for feature film. And when I talk about visual effects, that's usually photo fidelity things that merge with the frames of the film in a way that hopefully you can't tell. And obviously sometimes that's big spectacles like blockbuster films like The Avengers, but oftentimes there are directors like David Fincher who like to use a lot of visual effects just to tell a stronger story. Maybe make the surroundings, the props, the background match a period story, or just doctor things to tell the story a little bit better visual composition with the way the sky or the lighting strikes the actor, things like that. So along with visual effects, there's also feature animation, which are things like Pixar and DreamWorks and Disney animation and so forth. A lot of that is 3D, but not all of it. And then, of course, game development, which touches everything from mobile devices to consoles like the new PlayStation 5 and so forth. So those are some of the main areas, but a lot of this touches on to growing virtual reality production and augmented reality production, and even other related industries, fine art for installations and museum pieces and things to try to provoke some interesting thought in society. Also, visualization companies across the world often are using VR for training these days. NASA and other companies are creating visualizations to both prepare but also inform people. So all of these things touch on things other than just the entertainment industry. So there's a lot of stuff out there. All right, so the first trend that we'll kind of go through really quickly here is physically based. And when I say that, I'm mostly talking about rendering, which is putting a synthetic camera somewhere, having lights in our scene, objects that are modeled somehow, and then putting that all together, and materials and representing them is one large part of that. So when you represent materials, you kind of have to represent how light comes into any surface and it reflects, or it transmits and goes through it, or it scatters, or it gets absorbed. And those interactions, they are very complicated. Famous people like Richard Feynman studied it from a physics perspective, but even the Renaissance painters were concerned about light interactions as they represented color transfer from one object sitting next to another, or translucency in something they were painting. So this is an area that affects a lot of people, from very artistic to very technical in the study of materials. One way that computer graphics people represent it is through this fancy function, and we won't spend much time to go in it. It's actually a little bit easier than it looks. The basic idea is that it's representing that the light we see on something is either emitted by the object, or it comes in from some direction or multiple directions, and then gets totaled in the viewing direction that we're seeing objects from. So again, a very fancy technical way of representing what we might intuitively look at if we're doing a drawing or painting. But this is important for computer graphics because it helps lead into making more realistic objects. So a trend that started around 2012 or 2013 and was really kind of kicked off by work at Brent Burley in some ways at Disney was to try to get computer graphics to match real world lighting much more realistically. There's a very simple model for rendering based on some work done in the 70s, actually, for doing computer graphics appearance. And pretty much every game and most films use that model. And the team at Disney Research went in and studied a way to represent these complicated things like the way light bounces off the sides of materials or the way it transmits through them, and do it in an artist-friendly way so that if someone's working on a production, they don't want to worry about an index of refraction and remembering some number, but they want to intuitively go through and adjust things to reach their visual goals with the picture that they're creating. So Disney introduced this reflection distribution function, and it really took off. One of the first groups to translate it to games was with Brian Karras at Epic for Unreal Engine.
Hey,
So
Oh,
what's
sorry.
that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Are you showing your slides right now?
Are they not going?
Yeah, we're not seeing them. Sorry.
Ah.
It was really engrossing, so I wasn't sure. Wasn't sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for letting me know. Let's try this share again. All right. Are you seeing slides now?
Yes, now we are.
All righty, much better. Okay, so I'll do you the quick blast back through the slides you didn't see then. So would have been better with the slides, but there we go. So we're up to the Disney BRDF in 2013, and you can kind of follow this along if you go to this blog.selfshadow.com. A computer graphics researcher runs this blog and keeps up with these SIGGRAPH courses. And so you can kind of trace this development. But this was adapted for video games. So pretty much any video game done in the last 5 or 6 years completely changed the way it renders appearances. And Disney and other studios picked up on this too, because while real time is getting better, Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Weta Digital, they all switched over to something called path tracing, which is a much more realistic rendering. The detail doesn't come through completely, but if you were to study these frames between Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, the subtle indirect lighting bounces that really influence and make a beautiful picture come through much better with path tracing because it's actually modeling the way light bounces around a room. Whereas previously they kind of had to fake that because computer graphics really just handled direct lighting. So that's one area. You can also see a huge difference between the original Toy Story and Toy Story 4, where two primary things lead to that. One is introducing that path tracing that gets the nice ambient bounce, indirect light that we're used to also looking at when we do photography and painting and drawing. And then along with that is coming up with more efficient schemes for representing detail. So this antique shop, for instance, had thousands of realistic props and little spider webs and bent metal and all that detail throughout. So those things put together can tell a much more visually engrossing story. Okay, so the next trend, and I'm going to try to pick up the pace so we can get all of this in at least a little bit, is the increasing use of proceduralism, which is where you use descriptions to create geometry or materials on surfaces or other things like that. This is, I won't play this all because we won't have time.
Starting off, I kind of want to talk about nodes, how we created nodes and why they were a benefit to our team. We made a lot of custom nodes.
We'll kind of
speed us up, but once again, we use these a lot in a lot of our texture looking foliage because they came from the same library.
This part's pretty neat right here. So you can see the
because they came from the same library
foliage
of nodes
popping up through there. This was actually from a GDC talk, which is the Game Developers Conference, by John Loff and Andrew Dixon, which are actually some colleagues that I worked with when I did my tech art visit at Redstorm. One of the things they used there is Substance Designer, which rather than painting individual textures for surfaces, like you might do one of these bricks or painstakingly do a tile that repeats, they're coming up with descriptions using nodes, which is sort of akin to a visual programming in a way, to describe the patterns in both man-made objects and real-world natural objects, to do things like those vegetation pieces, different types of stone walls or floors. They were working on the Division 2 while I was there, and a lot of this work went into generating these large open world replications of Washington, D.C., where the game takes place. And that's an increasing trend in video games these days. This Ghost Recon game that came out a few years ago is one of the most famous because they took an extensive network of GIS data along with hand-painted textures and mapping, and they made these expansive open world scenes that kind of continue very realistically, all based on proceduralism. This other clip is from David Watson, who's a CG supervisor at the Foundry, which is one of the larger visual effects studios, and it's centered in London. And this is, I'll just again play some snippets, but this is them describing creating the city of Centra in The Witcher, which is the Netflix adaptation.
City Engine is a brilliant tool
famous,
for this layout
novels.
stage. You can work larger buildings dotted around for a more natural feeling,
So
as
they
well as
took
going as complex or as simple with the
mapping
individual building
information and they
companies
tied
for
it to
complete
this
basic,
architectural
adding some detail.
software.
Everything required to break
All
up
of
the
these
simple
buildings
geometric
throughout
shapes.
Centra
In
are
City Engine, we
procedurally
were able
generated.
to easily lay out exactly where these details would go.
Let me see if I can get
to
the
point.
clip where you kind of see.
This allowed us to get brilliant variation throughout the entire city. We then set up procedural tools to add tiles to all of the roofs. This was a really key part to add realism.
So aside from a few of those main buildings, which were sculpted by artists, all of the side buildings in this medieval city of Centra were described by rules. They made a few windows, a few doors, a few roofs, and then the rules distributed them in a scheme that they could guide using proceduralism. Okay, so the other trend is an increasing prevalence of real time. So both techniques, there are really sort of two approaches to creating images in computer graphics. One is rendering offline, or which is really not offline, it's thousands of computers usually. For instance, at ImageWorks, when I was there, they had 20,000 processors in one side of the building that was air conditioned to refrigerator temperatures. And then there's real-time rendering, which hopefully runs on your graphics processor on your computer or even your mobile phone. And they're both getting better every year, of course. As path tracing pushes offline rendering to become much more light faithful with ambient indirect light, real-time rendering is trying to bring in some of those aspects, and they have some simple ray trace models that they're bringing to real-time rendering. This is some clips actually from Weta Digital. Some of you may have seen this, but Weta, which is famous for doing the Lord of the Rings and the Planet of the Apes films and many other visual effects films, this is a proof of concept that they did working in Unreal Engine. So the individual strands of fur on the meerkat, the rocks, the details, all of this is actually being generated by the computer in real time. And they've got procedural feathers. I think the bird is a little bit less realistic than the meerkat. But that's a fun project to check out if you want to take a look and look it up later. Along with that, compositing, which is layering together multiple photographic and computer rendered elements together, is using real-time much more. As part of this project, the Foundry, which develops this compositing application called Nuke that most visual effects and animation studios use, actually integrated it with Unreal Engine, the very popular game engine, so that you could do some real-time tests of lighting and appearance. Obviously, a lot of you have probably enjoyed The Mandalorian recently.
Doing a French reverse, where you hit a button and the world...
They have this capture volume that they've built. And originally last year, they powered it with Unreal Engine. And this year, they're actually powering it with Helios, which is their in-house rendering software. But they motion control track the camera used by the film crew. And they actually replace the background using their real-time renderer with only the area that the camera sees behind the actor. And then the rest of the volume actually changes to generate real world lighting. So if it's a sunset or you're in a industrial sci-fi hangar where the ship's landing or whatever, those create true color and brightness intensities for your reflections in your real-time production. This type of production is catching on very quickly. If any of you watched Westworld season 2, a lot of the sets used this LED back wall technique with a game engine as well. And generally speaking, it's being coined the term virtual production. Industrial Light and Magic is actually trying to market their capture volumes now under the name Stagecraft. But it's a very neat sort of modern version of the old rear projection that was used in films in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but it's much more controllable and generates much more realistic appearances and lighting. Okay, another area that's catching on is machine learning. We see AI hyped everywhere, but like everything else, it's starting to reach computer graphics. This is an example of denoising path tracing. You can imagine that if you were trying to follow a light ray around a scene and see what really happens, that would be a very intensive thing to try to calculate. So every time you do that, you're getting a sample of the image. And if you only do it a few times, 12 or 16 or even 64, you have this very noisy looking image. Every little piece of grain in the left side is from those samples not being sufficient to bounce around the scene. So what they do is they can actually use machine learning to sort of filter them almost like a Photoshop filter, but in a much more intelligent way to clean up the noise so they can get this nice path traced, beautiful image and not have the artifacts that comes with it. Another area where this is catching on is compositing. Actually, the Foundry in their latest version of Nuke has released this tool called Copycat, where you can draw on a few frames to show the compositing tool what you want to separate. Or even I saw one instance where they painted out an actor's beard on 10 or so frames, and then it goes through and learns the pattern, and on the rest of the several hundred frames of the shot, it does the work mostly for you. And this type of thing's not perfect because machine learning makes lots of mistakes. But if you can get something that's close, it saves a lot of time because then you can just clean up the rough parts. Another area where machine learning is catching on is adding more detail to faces and face animation. So Thanos, the character in the latest Avengers films, was set up to do facial capture, and you see Josh Brolin on the right side there with a set of markers, and they had a template so the markers stayed in the same place every day. And the camera watches his face during the performance. He's actually on the set rather than just a separate room. And these little spheres you see down by his collarbone and up on his head, those are motion performance capture trackers. They're infrared projectors and cameras that track the position of those. So Josh Brolin's location is known, the dots show where his face is, the camera's tracked, and they can use some traditional animation 3D modeling techniques along with machine learning to transfer his performance to Thanos, which they sort of painstakingly built between a scan of Josh's face and trying to make him look more like the Thanos character and mix the elements so they maintain some of his appearance and performance. So there's a neat video out. We don't have time to watch it all, but you can see some of the detail that goes into creating Thanos there.
It's just the way it is. I'm just a messenger.
Algorithms, which you can see second from the right. He and his team would retarget that performance onto Thanos, copying all of the details onto the model while keeping the essence of Brolin's.
Okay, and this ties into something that's actually more related to a lot of the work that I do personally for some of my research and projects. So digital humans are becoming increasingly realistic, and a lot of work is going into that. Some of you might have seen Blade Runner 2049, where they did a version of the actress who was in the original Blade Runner, and then they did a performance based on her younger appearance. So in this, they're capturing the lighting reflected to the face through various lighting patterns, and then they go through and build a very intricate digital model, and they match the performance capture. And I think this is some of the best face work to date, actually. They did a very phenomenal job on matching her appearance. Some of you, if you keep track of game progress, this has been a big hype thing in the last months. Unreal Engine has released this tool in beta, and I actually just got signed on yesterday to play with it, called Metahumans. And it actually relates to something that Ubisoft is doing too. I saw at LaForge, which is their research division in Montreal, about 2.5 years ago. They've taken 3D scans of lots of people, and they've built a statistical model on the shape of the face and also on the various different skin textures, colors of skin, levels of wrinkles and pores and freckles. And they've tied all of those into statistical models on the appearance as well. So you can manipulate with sliders and create very believable 3D rigged models within just a matter of minutes. So if you haven't seen it, look up Metahumans.
Outright quality
and
that you'd
check out
expect
a little bit
in
of
a
that
AAA game
tool.
for anyone can use knowledge that used to, and all of
And
that.
they've got it set up
engine
so that you can
only for
create models from very intricate, almost film quality models, not quite, but pretty close, all the way down to very low detailed models that might run in a crowd scene in the back of a thing running on your game, on your local GPU. So one of the things that I do is a lot of work related to the face. This is one of the primary technologies that was developed at USC ICT, Institute of Creative Technologies. One of my PhD students actually had a chance to intern with them last summer and work on a face-related project. But they have techniques for lighting the face to capture various details that they've developed over the last decade and a half or so. This is some work out of Disney that led into the capture that's used on Thanos and the Hulk and all the other digital characters from Marvel and Disney films recently. So that kind of connects to some of the work and what I want to push both for digital production arts, DPA, and also for my visual computing research is 3D face related acquisition and improvements. So this is our studio room here in Charleston. And you'll see a photo in a second of that ball on the left there that's in progress. That was an initial dome that I worked on with Redstorm a few years ago, and we built an automated turntable to take thousands of pictures of models or props that people brought in for the game. And within, we press a button, we walk away, we come back a couple hours later, and we have several thousand pictures, which Reality Capture, one of the leading photogrammetry software packages, can turn into this super detailed mesh. It's less than a millimeter accuracy on all the different areas. We also built a rig so that we could capture normal maps automatically to represent materials. So you can see that one image there of him moving the bark around is just using the normal map. So it gives you a nice appearance of lighting. So we're taking some of these things and we're building, I've done some work on 3D faces and automatically retopologizing the scans that we get from multi-camera captures of people. These are often tied into facial action unit captures of an actor where they're doing 40 or so different expressions at different intensities. And that can be used to drive performances like Brad Pitt and Benjamin Button. All right, so I'm going to give you a brief little tour of some things for digital production arts next, and then we'll have some time for questions. So I work both in leading the digital production arts program and also in sort of more computer graphics related research. And this ties into a lot of the stuff I've done throughout my career at UNCW. As Heather mentioned, I helped get the digital arts program started there. I worked with the film department before it was a department and helped it become a department. And I worked a lot with studio art and art history over the years. So I came to Clemson to help lead this digital production arts program because for me, it was a chance to work with people at a little bit higher level too. So I really enjoy this. Our graduate program, our main graduate program that's been around for a long time is an MFA in digital production arts that is a fairly, I don't like using adjectives with unique, but it's almost a unique program. Let's say it that way. Texas A&M has one that's fairly similar, and there are a couple of others in the country. But our intent is to create people who are very skilled at both artistic and technical capabilities. So we do this through this curriculum that brings people in and hopefully catches them up. If they haven't had a lot of art background, we try to bring up their visual and drawing, perspective storyboarding skills. If they haven't had much coding background, we try to bring that up to where they're comfortable with Python and C, C++. And then we introduce them to core classes in 3D modeling and animation and lighting and visual narrative, storyboard development, all these skills that tie together across the production spectrum. And then we give people choices for electives from a wide variety of both very technical things like computer graphics programming, path trace rendering, physically based simulation for animation, or figure drawing, photography, and everything in between. And then we give people 2 capstone production experiences where they work on a small team doing usually an animated short, but sometimes a game or occasionally a visual effects production. And then we give them the chance to specialize with research hours and their thesis project where they can find their own focus, what they care about and want to invest themselves in, build a portfolio, and go on to do whatever it is they want to do after they finish the program. So in a way, it's a 3D generalist program, but it's rare in that it has the capability of really giving you strong skills on everything on the spectrum from art to very technical programming. And we've had people that flip-flop too. Computer science undergrads who come in and leave just modeling or digital painting, and an English major who comes in and leaves writing tools and software for the production industry. All right, so here's just a quick couple little trailers on the program. Apologies, I grabbed the one I noticed just now that has the audio watermark on it still. We did license the music later to use. Here's a little bit older clip on the program that still describes it pretty well.
Students in the Digital Production Arts program study a wide array of interdisciplinary skills, including art, psychology, performing arts, computer science, and graphics. DPA has a broad curriculum because in order to work in the modern era of animation, visual effects, and games, there is an expectation that people have a broad range of skills. DPA students are exposed to all aspects of production and will leave the program with an understanding of how to work in a team, how to create their own tools and software, and how to express themselves through narrative and visual art. Follow DPA online or contact us for more information.
So I'll just quickly show some samples as I talk through things. These are just a few I had on my computer from my rendering and shading class a couple semesters ago. The students did all the materials and lighting on these and rendered them in RenderMan, one of the best path tracers out right now. This is actually what I was having my visual effects class do this week. So we were doing a match move on a short video clip where we use some techniques in software to figure out how the camera moved originally, and we do what's called a set fitting so that we can model geometry, so we can put set extensions like our city background there, and just I grabbed a Hulk rig because it was easy. And then this is a very quick slap comp, but the idea would be to render this with better lighting and compositing, and you would make it look like this is actually our building in Charleston for DPA, like it's actually sitting in a tall skyscraper city area. And then we've got our character in front, which eventually we would render with shadow passes and other things like that for more realism. These are a couple of thesis projects recently. Kira Fogelsong's working at Epic out near San Francisco now at Epic Games. She's on their special projects team, so she gets to work on some really cool new stuff like that stagecraft system that Industrial Light and Magic originally partnered with Epic on. Her thesis centered around designing a game that was aimed at preteen female market to try to bring in some neat ideas that are contrary to the way the game industry has traditionally run. Matt Joyner just defended the other day. He wanted to go back and use inspiration from the animation of the late 20s and 30s with Max Fleischer on one of the few East Coast animation studios and Disney, which everybody knows, of course, to model 3D animated characters that fit that early rubber hose style animation. Alex Schlesinger defended last week. Her goal was to do a complete digital recreation of Artemisia Gentileschi's Baroque painting. Gentileschi was one of the few female painters successful in that time period and was inspired by Caravaggio's work and went on to do works that were in some ways stronger than his. And Alex did a great job. She modeled these three characters. She did their skin shaders in Unreal Engine, which this is actually real-time rendered, by the way. She did the hair models. She did the cloth simulations, all the materials and lighting involved in this. And this is shown as a painting, but you can actually move the camera throughout it in Unreal Engine. Deanne, this doesn't come through nearly as neatly on a slide, but she did an augmented reality with the Magic Leap recreation of Pompeii to bring it into your own space to make the eruption more of a reality to study historically. Justin is getting ready to defend in a few weeks. He's been working on a model for Sister Owl's iguana to bring attention to endangered species. These are clips you already kind of saw, so I'm going to skip past those. This is an animation in progress from one of our capstone projects.
Also in 2017, an ambitious researcher flower.
So this is actually kind of
will
mid-progress. You see play blasts of animations in progress, cut together, and then parts of it have been rendered in our initial pass it renders. So we're kind of putting this together, and we'll get all the shots rendered, and then we'll go to the post-production stage with sound and music and so forth. So I'm excited to see this project finish up. This was one that was done completely with our students in Charleston. This is our space in Charleston. We're right on the Cooper River. We have a wonderful edit suite, sweatbox type facility, and you can see the planning on the wall there for the Buzz short that we just showed clips from. We have some traditional studio space. We have a nice working area that has great lighting for all of our graduate students. We've got a professional quality digital cinema theater. And this is the light stage that I'm building right now. It was the ball in that earlier photo, but now we've got about half of our 360 or so RGB white lights that are going on it. So we'll be able to do digital human captures and material studies very soon with that device. So that's the end of my presentation. So hopefully wrapped up so we can have time for some questions, and anyone is certainly welcome to contact me about more information. We have a lot of neat graduate programs, everything from very artistic or combinations of both with the MFA. We have a new MS in digital production arts for those who are a little bit more technically minded. And then we also have master's and PhD programs in computer science that I mostly work with students that are interested in graphics, animation, computer vision, that sort of thing. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Hey. Hey, thanks. That was awesome. And probably I shouldn't say this in front of all our students, but now I really want to go back to grad school. So there's that. But man, it's so hard being 40 something. So man, I'm looking at the questions that the students gave us, and now I'm not quite sure. Like initially I was like, I'm just going to start here and work forward. But maybe I'm going to give the students a chance to like chime in their urgent questions before I start going through their questions. So students, if you want to. And I want to follow up on something related to a metahuman in part, but also
Sure.
There was that article I just read. Photoshop has that new plugin. Let me see if I can find this. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the plugin for Photoshop, but basically you can add smiles to photos more easily. It's that kind of thing.
Sure.
And just the other week, there was an article about the artist Matt Lowry, who decided to colorize the photos of Cambodian genocide victims and add smiles to them. And, clearly he had conceptual reasons for doing this, but
Sure.
the fallout's been massive, right? And so one of the things that I research is disinformation in social media spaces. And so deep fakes, of course, is a big
Sure.
part of that.
Yeah.
So one of the earlier student questions was, how are some of these technologies maybe beginning to intersect outside of games, film, TV, our sort of the consumer-based visual sphere. So I can imagine this might be something that dips into areas of intelligence research, or I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, just some general comments, because it's probably a little too soon to qualify or quantify a lot. One is, mostly sadly so far, a lot of these advanced techniques have just been used for completely silly sort of things like Snapchat filters and TikTok and put a bathrobe on us while we're Zoom conferencing or whatever. There's some fairly advanced stuff in face tracking relating to all of that. And that's one area. And I think just as a society, we need to be cognizant of how much time we spend on social media and privacy invasion and so forth. But there are already concerns of deepfake use in manipulation with social media. Russia, Iran, Korea, lots of other countries have been caught ostensibly trying to manipulate elections. There was one incident in Charleston, actually, where they tried to basically instigate a violent riot between two groups in downtown this past summer with some of the protests that were going on. So that's an area that we need to be careful about and think about thoughtfully. But there are interesting uses in art. Some of the people are starting to use tools for interesting ways, less controversial than the one you mentioned, but some that are very controversial as well. And I think we'll see a lot more of this, especially very soon, with tools like Metahuman eventually being released to the public, and the growing ease of using a tool like deepfakes as well.
So going on to some of the student questions, and Mark, that's a great question. I'm going to come back to that one because I'm wondering that too. An undergraduate program like ours, it has it's real bare bones, right? Like we have one class in 4D design that's basically like principles of animation, and we have one 3D modeling class that's like a pipeline class, and one video art class. And so they get kind of a view of the spectrum of the sort of major spheres that exist. And then we release them out into the world. And I think that's true for a lot of art programs. I think that's pretty common. So a lot of our students were asking this question about thinking about graduate degrees. And so I'm just going to read some of them because they're very similar, and you can sort of tackle them as you want. So this one is from Natalie, who's one of our digital media BFA students, also did illustration, right, Natalie? Tell me if I'm wrong. In your opinion, what are the pros of going into graduate school instead of just going and getting a job right out of undergrad? And what would the cons be? And I can think of unnecessary debt being the biggest answer. And then Nicole, who's another digital media BFA, asked, would you say that getting an MFA is worth it in the long run? What do you see as the benefits specifically related to VFX, animation, and UI?
Certainly. Great questions. I'm very cognizant of undergraduate degrees having a lot to try to do and prep people. In designing them, my goal was always to get resources available to where people could get themselves to the careers that they wanted to, but keeping in mind that things had to be broad enough to service a lot of people. So with that in mind, graduate degrees are usually an excellent option. Obviously, there's the elephant in the room of debt, which a lot of people have to take on. The technical and research programs often have the advantage that a lot of research funding gives people assistantships. So those who are capable of doing the technical and research related ones often can get through graduate school without debt. More challengingly, unfortunately, since no federal entity is giving out large amounts of money for us to do our own artwork, those are a little bit more challenging because people often have to take on more of the financial burden. So there is that. But that being said, there are a few really strong reasons for graduate degrees. One, an undergraduate degree really only gets you to where you can start playing in your field. It gets you your basic skills and information. And graduate degrees let you push into the really fun stuff and the more advanced stuff. You've built your skills, you've proven yourself. Now you can really go into what you want to. You can also build a world network as you're doing that. We're connected with people all over the place, like-minded individuals, and we have resources to help make those connections. You get a chance to progress in both your enjoyment, but also in your thinking to do deeper work in whatever you choose to do. And ultimately, if you use it right, you can really push yourself to the next level. And then on the pragmatic side, you can often get a salary bump with a graduate degree. Most of the statistics, this varies from program to program and career choices, et cetera. But most statistics still support that over your lifetime, you earn more with a graduate degree than you would otherwise. And our graduate students, just to give you a rough idea, they leave starting salaries between low 50s and high 90s. And one of my students was at Blue Sky, which unfortunately Disney shut down recently. Within a month, he had offers from Walt Disney Animation, Rockstar Games, and Blizzard Cinematics, making about 20% more than he was actually making at Blue Sky. So lots of good opportunities out there, and it's an area that won't go away anytime soon. So it is a good investment.
Cool. So, following up on that, and I'll just, students, I apologize. I'm just going to like ad hoc your questions because a bunch of you asked things that were really similar. So let's say they're going to go straight into the industry from undergrad for financial reasons. One is like, I think a lot of them think like, oh, there's Pixar and or Ubisoft, and that's kind of where it ends.
Yeah.
But there's clearly a lot of different nuance in that, a lot of different types of specializations. So I guess one, what are some more specialized positions that you think undergraduate students should be aware of, and just thinking about that in terms of their portfolio when they're graduating? And then the other side of that is, what should that portfolio really look like? So we talk about reels a little bit, but but I don't know if that's just old hat me being.
No, yeah, so I'll try to tie all those questions together and even tie it to the last one. So if I keep them all straight in my head, that is.
I can go back and reiterate. Yeah, just remind me.
So yeah, remind me again, please.
Oh yeah, so the first one is like, what are some of those specializations or fields that
Gotcha.
people don't know about, but they should probably.
Yeah, I'm good. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one area that grad school, particularly in digital production, helps you make a leap. You can potentially leapfrog 3 to 6 years by doing a 2 to 3 year long graduate program, because you're getting specialized and you're getting to a higher level that makes you more interesting to the studios. Fresh out of undergrad, it is much more competitive, and probably 1 out of 2 or better out of our program, it's even probably higher than that. It's probably like 4 out of 5 walk in pretty quickly. At an undergraduate level, it's maybe like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20. And you should expect, no matter what, to start fairly low when you enter the industry, like maybe helping manage the renders coming out, or doing some fairly simple menial kind of things. But if you prove yourself and you keep working on your art, then you can walk into other positions. So graduate degrees help with that. Related to the types of positions, we sort of generally refer to it as the production pipeline, and it goes all the way through from story development, concept art, interpreting that story into visuals, visual development, layouts, camera choices, lighting choices, color choices, modeling those assets, look development to create computer graphics materials, like I mentioned, for those elements, rigging the characters so they move properly, animating the characters, lighting the scenes, revisiting the camera, doing effects, doing hair, doing cloth, rendering to make it look good, compositing to put it all together, color correction, sound. There are people to produce along the way and organize things. There are project managers along the way. There are technical directors that do some art and some coding and problem solve. Maybe an artist has trouble animating something and the hair is acting weird. So they call a technical director who goes back and forth between the programmer who did the tool and the artist who's doing the hair animation and fixes the problem. And that's an area that our program has traditionally been very strong at. And those people do very well because they're rare. They have a strong skill set on both sides, and that puts them in demand and also makes their salary and job offers a little bit better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then I guess that the follow-up to that is so, and maybe we can steer it towards both, like students who are going to just try the long haul and just go straight from the undergrad to the industry, but then also ones who are maybe thinking about the DPA program or similar programs. What are some things advice you give to them about their portfolios, putting those together?
Oh yeah, that was the third part. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm not saying you can't do it from undergrad, and I definitely encourage you to try, particularly if graduate school is not an option. If you go that route, work personally whenever you have time on your own portfolio material, and push it and develop it as best you can, and then just apply, and get whatever other job you can in the meantime. And that's kind of the path. I met a guy who was a lighter at ImageWorks. He actually graduated from UNCW, which is how I met him, but he graduated in geology like 15 years ago, hated rocks after he got his degree, and pirated Maya, taught himself lighting, and got a job, and then worked up to bigger and bigger studios. So the paths are interesting and different, but working on portfolio, it's fairly simple. People make it more complicated than it is. Your portfolio should look as close as possible to the things you want to do. If you want to do stylized toon animation at DreamWorks, your portfolio needs to look like stylized animation at DreamWorks. If you want to animate Spider-Man photorealistically for the next Marvel Sony blockbuster, then you should do some photoreal work. And that includes both building your traditional skills. Can you do a good figure drawing with proportions and dynamics and gesture and shading and form? Can you photograph to get lighting and contrast across? Can you model? Can you shade? Whatever it is you're doing, push it to that level. And you don't have to do everything, but take the pieces that you want to get really good at and push and push and push on those things and show that in your portfolio. And that's what gets you the attention, because you've got about 20 seconds to sell your clip when the 3 or 4 people are in the real room going through all of the applications.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I think, one thing I give advice to our digital media students is, just because we don't require 10,000 drawing classes for the digital media BFA, if you want to go this particular route, oh my gosh, take every single drawing class you can get. And the flip side is, if you want to go this route, take every single photography class you can possibly take. So I think it's like, because we're trying to simulate things in the real world, understanding the physical world around us in a really real, tangible way, getting in and taking ceramics classes if you're going to be making ceramics, right? Or simulations of ceramics. Like, I think that sort of idea of connecting the digital to the physical is garbage in, garbage out. But that's true if it's algorithmic too. So
that's true. It's very true. I see Merrick has some good questions in the chat too.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump to those, and let's see. Oops. Okay. Oh wait, I'm looking at. There's some student questions too.
Sure.
So one thing that we're trying to do. Oh, Mark says a bunch. Okay, wait, I missed some of these. Hold on.
I can answer his really quickly too.
Yeah. Go for it.
So ethics. We don't have a specific thing that's required in our program. I actually used to teach some of those classes at the undergraduate, which were some of my favorite classes because people don't pause to think enough today. So it's always good to introduce that. We do have some elective options that students could do, but it's not a huge component, sadly. I would like to grow that. In terms of writing being bad, that's a very good point. The The problem is largely because executives who sometimes don't take the time invest in things that are half-baked. It's always a good idea on any creative project to spend more time planning because that's less expensive and makes the project better. And that includes writing. The last one from Eric, and then we can get back to others. Traditional studio skills are definitely useful. If we were reviewing a portfolio for a student and they had a lot of drawing, well, one, actually, if they have good traditional artwork, we really don't actually care if they have 3D stuff or not coming into our program. In fact, a lot of times people make the mistake of putting bad 3D stuff on their portfolio, and they might have could have had 4 or 5 really nice photos or drawings or paintings that would have shown their potential a little bit better than something they did in the first month of a 3D class. So yeah, the traditional skill is very important because really what you're training at the end of the day is your mind. Can you notice these things and can you work with them creatively and technically?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually following up on those, I think you and I have talked before about how here at UNCC we're just at the beginning phases of talking about, is it possible to make an undergraduate game design program? And there's more questions than answers at this point. But core to that has been using approaches from human-centered design to build an ethical framework, so that when you're designing things, not only you're thinking about your target audience, but you're also thinking about how representations within that game or that film could potentially impact people who aren't the target audience and potentially in negative ways. So working ethics into the core of that practice. And that's something that, like, I think almost all academic disciplines could do better, maybe aside from ethics itself.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, as a world civilization, we've rushed headlong into technology without thinking about its repercussions. So it is much needed.
Yeah. And I mean, any new technology, that's always been the case. When the car came about, we didn't have rules for roads, like what, so you problems, for better or worse, we've always shot technology, like a little belatedly, but for writing too, for anybody who's interested in game writing, I would really recommend looking up the work of Mel Macabry. They used to work for Ubisoft Montreal and did a lot of the writing for the early Assassin's Creed Syndicate games. And anyway, there's some real rich potentiality in really good writing and really good storytelling. And a lot of that ties back to these ethical questions too. So going back to some of the student questions, let's see, where was I? Oh, right. So this is another sort of tech question. And we're basically out of time, but I'll ask this last one.
Sure.
So a lot of times students want to know what's the right software to learn. So we've been teaching Blender. We're going to transition to Maya just for lots of different reasons. But,
sure.
But I sort of say, well, where you end up working, they might have their own in-house thing anyway. So they all want to know, what software should they know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll reiterate that it's more important that you understand the concepts as you're going along, because most software at the end of the day does things fairly similarly. If you wanted to pick one out of the many, I mean, I probably would say invest your time in Maya because that's used by more people. So it would save you a little bit of ramp up time if you went somewhere. But there are places who use different things. A lot have proprietary at the bigger studios. Redstorm had kind of a fun policy where they let you use whatever you want as long as you got the job done. That's rare, but it exists. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much. Students, you can cyberstalk the DPA website and find him and check out their program. We have 2 alumni in that program, and maybe someday we'll invite them in the future to talk about their experience there. So
yeah, they're great. We've enjoyed them. So send more. And anyone who has questions, just email me, ekp@clemson.edu.
Well, thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate it. And thanks for showing up today.
Happy to join you. And maybe next year it'll be in person.
Yeah. Oh, man.